All right, good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started, even though I think some more folks are going to start filtering in here. Congratulations to those of you who found the room. I know it's not obviously marked as Potomac D, but bonus points for finding it anyway. Thanks for joining us for the digital transformation panel at See Your Space this year. As the four of us were kind of preparing for this session, one of the things we kept coming back to is that phrase, digital transformation, is a little bit buzzwordy. It can mean a lot of things. So one thing we're going to try to do here today is drill down on some specific examples and challenges, but examples where that's really happening and where some of those challenges are, because I genuinely do think that there have been some things that have happened over the past few years, especially, and things that are being worked right now, where transformative actually is the right word. Each of these services are using the cloud in ways where they're not just migrating big systems out of government data centers and into commercial cloud environments, which was kind of the objective maybe a decade ago, but cloud is really starting to be integrated into key facets of how these services operate every day and that the workforce touches every day, whether they know it or not. Things like identity services, email and collaboration, and the Navy's using it for what I think they would tell you is a working zero trust architecture today, right? And then you look at connectivity. As we heard on another panel yesterday, PLEO, proliferated low Earth orbit satellites, exponential increases in the amount of bandwidth you can deliver afloat and to some of the other disadvantaged shore sites out there. That's happening too. So for a lot more on all that, and what I think is going to be a great discussion over the next hour, we've got some of the folks who are at the forefront of all this from all three C services and from industry. Brian Campo, Deputy CIO and Deputy G6 at the Coast Guard. I'm sorry, CG6 at the Coast Guard. He's not with the Army. Also with us is Lewis Coplin, the Executive Director at the Navy Program Executive Office for Digital and Enterprise Services. Colonel Barian Woodward, Chief of the Operations Branch within IC4. That's Information Command, Control, Communications, and Computers at Headquarters Marine Corps. And Barbara Suppley, Executive Vice President for SAIC's Navy Business Group. We're going to go down the line here. We're going to give a few minutes for each of these folks to give us some opening statements. Brian, start us off, please. Feel free to, tell me if I'm right that there is transformative stuff going on here, or correct me.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think, for Coast Guard, we are really taking transformation across the board. We're looking at different ways to not just deliver IT, but to deliver outcomes. Starts with, as you talked about, transformation, digital cloud. How can we leverage the cloud a little bit differently than we have before? It's no longer just a place where we're starting to put applications, but we're actually trying to look at how does cloud allow us to deliver capabilities differently? Things like software platform, trying to build to deployment zones that replicate across multiple clouds. Even starting to think about, like, when we deploy to our Coast Guard cutters, how can we deliver to the same container orchestration? How can we think about the landing zones that we're using in multiple ways? Those are sort of the sort of table stakes, as you mentioned, right? That's a starting point for digital transformation. But I think we're trying to look past that right now. We're trying to look at how do we get away from just delivering technology to delivering true outcomes. How do we bring our customers into our delivery methodologies? How do we think about them and have them sitting there with us, telling us immediately whether what we're delivering is going to be valuable for them or not? That is really where we're starting to see some actual transformation. Being quicker to deliver, delivering more often, delivering in better increments. And then I think the sort of last focus for us from a transformation is trying to think about how do we take a very overburdened workforce. How do we give them better tools and technology? So thinking about it from a platform perspective, IT stepping away from trying to deliver every single piece of technology that the workforce has, to really starting to think about how does IT deliver the platforms so that our digital native users, those JOs, those enlisted folks that understand technology probably as good as anybody in the CIO's office. How do we give them the tools so they can start to deliver, become a force multiplier from us from a workforce perspective, and really help them automate the things they do, help them with better ways to produce mission outcomes. So I think for us, transformation is a journey, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of opportunities for us to think about transformation, but it does kind of start with cloud. That's really the place where we're trying to land things.
That's great. Louis, please.
Yeah, those were some awesome remarks. I'm tempted just to go on a riff about how finding this room is a zero trust analogy and conditional access and visibility of resources, but I won't.
That's good.
Yeah, so digital transformation is a strategy. Strategies exist to solve problems. So it's really about not digital transformation as a statement of values, but what specific problems are we trying to solve? And it comes back to the mission owners and the personas that we're trying to support. So whether it's ready day one, when we have a new hire, do they have access to the network and the information environment and a functional device and they can log in rather than sitting on the clock for days or weeks waiting for all those wickets to be passed? Or whether it's eliminating the SAR form, the System Access Authorization Request, or when we lose our conventional access to remote access to the network, do we have a cloud-enabled alternative that's ready to go and to scale, as we were able to do on the Navy side? Or, for folks who need to access classified information, can we make it more accessible while still respecting the rules of OPSEC so that potentially you don't have to drive hours to get to a location to execute a 10-minute task? So reducing the daily toil, empowering all those local CIOs or SIXs or equivalents to be able to support their own local community better to accelerate mission delivery is really where we're trying to go on digital transformation. And as many have observed, digital transformation is not a technology problem, it's a culture problem. Or stated a bit differently, IT is easy except for the people. So we've got exactly the right IT to do IT the way we do it today. So something needs to change if we're expecting this transformation to actually have effect, changing the culture and not just the strategy.
That's great. Colonel Woodward, please.
Thank you, sir. Barry and Woodward, Headquarters Marine Corps. I want to take a little different approach as I answer the question. And before I answer it, a little context. Back in March of 2020, the Deputy Commandant of Information drafted and published the Marine Corps Network Modernization Plan. All right, and this plan sought to realize the vision of the Marine Corps information enterprise environment over the course of the FIDP. All right, the original plan included objectives that numbered about 70 or so, and those were decomposed into literally hundreds of tasks. So we have this plan. Subsequent updates of that plan are driven by a strategy update. Most of the folks in this room have heard of Force Design 2030. Additionally, things like the DON's Information Superiority Vision, JADC2, now CJADC2. All of these strategic guidance documents are considered in the updates to the Network Modernization Plan. But the real transformative piece that the Marine Corps has pursued over the course of the last 18 months or so is how do we organize to deliver the Network Modernization Plan? As you can imagine, that plan, which has four, as you were, two lines of operation, a technical approach and a managerial approach. The technical approach includes 5 lines of effort to include transport and infrastructure, hybrid cloud and data centers, services, cybersecurity, workforce. And the managerial approach includes things like governance, C2, resource management, service management, and that overarching enterprise architecture. So most of the panelists have talked about so far kind of that technical approach piece of it, but we had to really think about particularly the governance. How are we going to organize to deliver these capabilities at the speed of need? In the beginning of 2022, we set out a very ambitious task of organizing a cross-functional, cross-organizational governance structure to centrally manage and synchronize all the efforts from concept to divestment across the entire IT and networking portfolio in order to realize the objectives captured within all of our institutional strategic guidance with force design in the forefront. So that task force, again, cross-functional, cross-organizational, initially decomposed into 4 task groups. One focused on networks and services, another focused on application modernization, a third focused on data and AI, think making data more accessible across the enterprise, and last but not least, task group cloud. That is not everything in the portfolio. However, we had to focus, right? The whole idea is to focus here. One key point, this cross-functional team, the task force, in conjunction with the existing statutory processes used throughout the department, sought to leverage safe, agile methodologies. As you can imagine, this was received with mixed, emotions, concerns, but I'd be happy to delve into that a little bit. But my short answer then is really, how do we change, transform, how do we govern delivering this wide swath of capability, all while we're flying the plane, right? Operations don't stop. And so how do we continue to support the operating forces and the Marine Corps writ large while we undertake this monumental modernization effort?
That's great. Barbara, how's this all look from industry side?
So we've had quite a few lessons learned at SAIC during implementation of cloud computing environment, Cloud One, and most recently T-Cloud for the Department of Treasury. And as Mr. Copland said and Colonel Woodward said, the power of the cloud is exponential, but the devil is in the details. And specifically, speed to value for the government depends on a few key items. The architecture of how you set up your cloud from its inception is extremely important, especially in a multi-cloud environment. If you do, for instance, if you do one specific cloud without the understanding of overall all of the capabilities of the varied service providers and that you're going to operate in a multi-cloud environment, transformation and transition into a multi-cloud environment is very difficult. So thinking about that from the very beginning, being able to have a multi-cloud environment for that speed to value is dependent upon several technologies like mesh networking, et cetera, that will enable you to not have to have cross-domain guards and things of that nature, so your data is not held up and bandwidth constricted in that manner. But also to Lewis's point is something that's really vitally important is the workforce. And if we don't train the workforce in the manner to maximize the utility of the cloud, they will continue to use it as they did with their on-prem servers, and they will micro-segment themselves into a space that causes the government an exceptional amount of additional spend, and it'll be exceedingly difficult to try to discern what that is. So that training is paramount, to understand how do you fully leverage it to make the most use of it to meet the goals that the government has for exactly that, the speed to value of the implementations.
Wonderful. We do have 2 microphones set up here. Whenever y'all are ready, please feel free to approach those. I want to get to you as soon as possible, but in the meantime, we'll discuss among ourselves here. I want to talk a little bit about the connectivity piece. A lot of changes there in just the past couple of years just because of technologies like PLEO and 5G. Talk a bit, and feel free, whoever wants to jump in on this, what does that enable you to do, having several hundred megabits available to you on a cutter or a carrier, in terms of what you can design now that the workforce afloat now has the ability to consume cloud services, as long as they're not in a DDoS environment, in the same way they would ashore?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think we have kind of gone, I don't want to say all in on PLEO, but PLEO has been an amazing capability for us from a Coast Guard perspective. Specific to the Coast Guard, I think when you get up into the polar latitudes, right, we have an ice-breaking mission, and there was no connectivity up there. So we literally operated DDIL all the time in the northern and southern latitudes. So just being able to do basic patching, just being able to do basic communications with our security cutters, up in the latitudes is very different. As we sort of move out into more of a global Coast Guard perspective, it's also been very different for us. We can talk about being able to get communications better, being able to do more and better applications. Rather than having to put every application on the cutter, now they can actually interact with the same applications they would if they were at a shore station. But I think one thing that gets lost is there is an operational constraint, which is morale. And morale of a coastie being able to communicate back to whatever that shore is, being able to maybe send an email to their loved ones while they're out on deployment for months at a time. That's something that often gets overlooked. It's difficult when they are out for months at a time with zero communication. So, from a readiness perspective, absolutely, ubiquitous connectivity, whether it's 5G, whether it's PLEO, that makes a huge difference for us from a capability perspective. But there's also the workforce, the sea duty readiness piece of it as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. Well, first I want to say that a lot of the things I'm saying today, if you don't feel like writing down, you can find them on our website at www.poddigital.navy.mil under industry engagement. We have a lovely booklet and helpful, colorful graphics. But one of our goals is actually to use diverse and resilient transport to bring the power of cloud to the point of mission. And that doesn't mean always on cloud, it can mean DDIL. But that derived from a DON-CIO objective in the information superiority vision and the capstone design concept around optimizing the information environment for cloud. That's really delivering compute, store, transport abundantly, both globally and tactically. And the point of that is not just the compute, store, and transport and the diversity and the resilience, but also being an enabler for everything that rides on it so that software developers or end users or whoever aren't spending their time worrying about the foundations. They can take those, they can inherit them, they can be enterprise services, they don't have to retread that ground, and then they can advance the ball from where others have already taken it. So the additional capability is great in and of itself, but I think more importantly, it helps us start to transform our concept of the information environment from one where we have to fight and scrape for the connectivity and the compute and the store to one where we can innovate, but we can also raise our vision and look downfield at data and identity and specific use cases.
Sure, from a Marine Corps perspective, it's probably important to bring up the concept of a stand-in force. So the concept was drafted in 2021, and to paraphrase, the value proposition for the Marine Corps operating within the first island chain, if you will, is to be the eyes and the ears of the joint force. Ubiquitous transport allows us to achieve not only that in support of the joint force, but to extend that information that's being gathered or that data that's being gathered across the globe to the USG writ large.
And so one of the areas that we've been working on with CBC2, cloud-based C2, is clearly an enabling technology, and the networking is just as important. But I would like to offer in that same space, especially with our multinational partners, the security and the ability for attribution that allows for you to proliferate the right data to the right people is enabled by AI, it's enabled by your multi-level security, as well as zero trust, as well as the cloud migration strategies that you have deployed and the networking. I mean, I know that we talk about morale, and that is vitally important. But as we come to the end of this decade, it's equally as important that all of those technologies holistically enable us to be able to communicate with all of our partners that are going to be on Team USA.
That's great. I think we have an audience question.
Yes,
Please go
thank
ahead.
you. John Harper with Defense Scoop. I have a question for Mr. Copland and another one for Colonel Woodward. Mr. Copland, can you give us an update on where things stand with the Neptune Cloud Management Office? A few months ago, you had said some initial sprints were underway with that, so I was wondering how that's going and then what's next for that organization. And then Colonel Woodward, how does that Neptune office factor into the Marine Corps' broader transformation efforts, and how would you assess that that's going so far for the Marine Corps?
Sure, happy to respond to that. So the question was, where are we on the Neptune Cloud Management Office? That's an office we stood up in PO Digital to bring together the cloud service management functions that the Don Cloud policy assigned to us, which basically say, have a single point of entry where anyone can discover available cloud services, not limited just to what we do in PO Digital. It's inclusive of what we can get across DoD and even federally, and then help them to consume those cloud services quickly, easily, at best value. And that is a naval offering. So we do have a Navy line of effort and a Marine Corps line of effort within that. And the Marine Corps effort has already been in flight for some time. When we stood up Neptune, we were just getting the Navy effort going, so we've been staffing up over the course of the fiscal year. But we do have a revised portal up, and it's now iterating on a bi-weekly basis, sprints. And you can find that at digital.navy.mil/cloud. So that is where we're starting to vector everything together. The intent is to offer not just IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, but also all the enterprise services. So we have things like Naval Identity Services, which I mentioned for ICAM and getting rid of SARS and doing single sign-on. We've got the Naval Integrated Modeling Environment for model-based systems engineering, and things like Jupiter, which is the Don subtenant of Advana from DoD CDAO, and Marine Corps Bolt, which is a subtenant. So we're making some progress. It took us a while to, I would say, get that first iteration going as the team came together, but now everyone's in place, and I think we're moving pretty well. And for fiscal year 25 coming up, we're really lifting our target and looking at how do we start to migrate and modernize workloads at scale. So we need to start moving those through and across the full range of options. It's not just Azure or AWS, it's Google and Oracle, it's Appian and Pegasoft and Salesforce and ServiceNow, and it's really everyone who has an offering is welcome to the marketplace, and we're gonna do our best to make sure that people are matched up through a concierge service with the right solution.
From my perspective, sir, it was an ask from the Marine Corps. We had a lot of disparate efforts using a lot of different platforms, and we needed help. Having that concierge, if you will, the front door, the onboarding and the detailed onboarding support to our myriad of functional area mission owners across the Marine Corps, and that's working well. It's not lost on me. A lot of that time was pursuing those foundational pieces to allow acceleration when we actually get to the customer side of their actions, right? And I think we're there now.
Yeah. I should add, because people always ask, there is no competition between Neptune and Cloud One or Platform One and Sea Army and the ECMA. We're one community. We're trying to get all the mission owners to where it makes sense for them to go. There's no pride of ownership. I refer people to Cloud One. It's not a thing. And we work closely with this on JWCC. So everyone's just at the table trying to get the work done.
Brian, what does cloud procurement, cloud management look like from the Coast Guard perspective? I imagine there are some cases where it makes sense to use a DoD service, but you've got a lot of non-Title X responsibilities and authorities and partnerships that you also need to think about. So how different and how similar is it from what we just heard from our
Yeah, I mean, to start with, we operate on the DoD, right? So we're operating on the DoD's information network. But we are more of a law enforcement. If you heard the commandant yesterday, right? We're an emergency response organization as well as our support to the DoD. So we do have some unique constraints. We have Coast Guard Cloud, which is sort of the same thing as what what the Navy and the Marine Corps are doing. Broad platform of cloud services that go across multiple cloud providers. We do, though, have some disparity there because we've got to work with state and local law enforcement. We've got to work with our DHS partners. So connectivity can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. We're working on some data platforms that will allow us to take the applications that exist maybe in the DoD cloud, move them across. We also have an Advana platform, a data and AI platform that allows us to sort of move that data across the tenants. Right now, DISA and Coast Guard are working on some new ways to interface, especially in the Microsoft Cloud tenants. Different opportunities for us to look at what they call business to business, so cross-tenant operations. And then, the other big piece of it is just a good interface layer, right? So having a clear understanding of where your data lives, understanding how you're interfacing with your data. Look, everything old is new again, right? We had ESBs 15, 20 years ago that were sort of the gateway to API services. Now we're looking at them a little bit differently in that, we're looking at them as endpoints. But that's really where we try to operate is cloud is sort of the place that we start. And to be honest, it's the formation of our security strategy, right? Cloud for us is really going to be how we look at implementing 60, 70% of zero trust. If we can do well with our cloud platforms, if we can build them out, and we are following the DoD model there, we want to move things to the cloud in order to make them secure, especially when we're thinking about legacy applications. One, it sort of forces us to think about security differently, forces us to get after some of our legacy applications. And third, it gives us a consistent approach to security, which I think is going to be crucial, especially if we're really trying to make zero trust ubiquitous across 27. So, for us, it's a very broad strategy as far as where we go. But specifically, we leverage a ton of what Navy's doing. We're actually trying to model their enterprise services office inside the Coast Guard now, which has been absolutely valuable for us.
Please.
Quick question. Hello. This is a Navy question specifically, sorry. Jim Dort from Newport News Shipbuilding. So in regards to contractors and primes and ISEA type functions and those type of things, how are you integrating those items into your Neptune way of going forward and trying to drive shipbuilders and the submarine industrial base and other ones towards something that would be more inclusive so that we can actually get to the right data and also be able to provide the right data in the right way? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so if I understood the question correctly, it's how do we bring in the industrial base into a data sharing environment that meets the needs of everyone? And there are a few different ways. One is, we mentioned B2B, so we had a kind of halcyon period with CVR where everyone could see everything in the DoD, except for certain folks who are already ahead of that. And that's where we're trying to get back to now, but leveraging that very aggressive and comprehensive zero trust approach at the IL5 level and above. So B2B is really complicated, very difficult to honor those IL5 zero trust principles, but still make it convenient and easy for end users to just get their jobs done. The good news about that is it's starting to come into effect now, and anyone who's got that M365 IL5 backbone of their own, we can configure the B2B rights with great granular control so that we should be able to, Newport News, Lockheed Martin, academia, Homeland Security, anyone, any entity that we need to bring into the environment, we can configure those data rights and the sharing and the Teams channels and ultimately Outlook calendar visibility and things, ideally. So that's going to be a big piece. That's not the whole piece because there's a lot of data outside of that environment besides the file storage. So we're also thinking about things like government furnished cloud. Can we, especially for small businesses and non-traditionals, furnish those data environments where they don't have to engineer a zero trust cloud solution because we have an enterprise service and they can onboard that, And that has some economic value for us too, because we should be specializing and going where our competencies lie, and we want people who are innovating in specific areas, not necessarily innovating to deliver what we've already delivered. So if we can furnish that and they don't have to charge us back to do that for us again, and we can leverage our buying power to deliver it at a better rate, that's kind of a win-win all around. And then I would say that there's just a broader zero trust data control policy that we all need to be working on. It's kind of the question whenever you have analytics and you go out and you deliver the new tool and you're all excited and you go up and you say, okay, what questions do you want to answer? And the business unit lead looks at you and goes, I don't know. And you're like, well, I just built this thing for you. What should I do with it? So the security classification guides, understanding who are the data stewards, what are the data tags. If we want to get down to cellular ABAC multi-level security, then someone needs to actually be thinking about what that looks like, and not just the technical means to implement it, but the semantic content to drive it in the first place. And that's outside of our domains for the most part, but we can help energize that conversation.
If I might add, as I mentioned before, anecdotally with CBC2, the same technologies that are available that allow us to share with our multinational partners can be extended and utilized for the purposes of protecting IP and data that belongs to certain elements within the overall DoD ecosystem, as well as our partners in the Coast Guard. If we can trust those technologies to be able to share classified data where at the attribution level that you mentioned, we most certainly can use it for the purposes of industry data and protecting that data and having the ability to trust that. So there are technologies, but we as an entire industrial base are going to have to work, in my opinion, with the government to trust, if you will, not zero trust, but trust those implementations and be willing to partner with the government in that way.
It's a real cultural shift at the CUI level. I mean, we do this at Secret and Higher with much more rigor, but the CUI level, that's not the mindset. And it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of sustained messaging and a lot of training and tooling and so on to get people there.
The data access piece is obviously very hard, and this is almost a side point, but it occurs to me that once you start delivering IT services through the cloud, through things like virtual desktops, it does simplify a bit the things that contractors need to carry around and other members of the workforce need to carry around. I imagine Barbara's folks who are working on Navy contracts, for example, may no longer have to have a government-furnished desk or a government-furnished laptop and an SAIC laptop. It all just comes to you via one.
I've had some of my employees wait 6 to 12 months for an MCI desktop or laptop, right? So even the implementation of the virtual desktop flying speed has been hugely advantageous.
Yeah, it really does allow us to lean out the infrastructure and focus it where it needs to be focused. So, right, a lot of contractors won't need GFE in the future. They can use their CFE and then get into our Azure Virtual Desktop, which we call Nautilus, and that's been very successful and helped us, when the VPNs went down. But it also allows us to make finer-grained decisions about what type of solutions to provide, because maybe some of our contractor workforce doesn't need that flank speed account, doesn't need Nautilus Virtual Desktop, can just use their own internal IT, and then we've got the B2B connectors. So it gives us a lot more options to play with, and that's good. It allows us to deliver the right solution at the right cost at the right place.
Right. Sir, please.
Yeah, thank you. You may have touched on my question here, but I'd like to try and get more details. So I represent a small business. We develop product services that will live on the network in the cloud. We're not developing the network or the cloud. So my question really is, how do companies like us understand, know, and find out what the requirements are to get on the cloud and in the network and use the data that's there, as a consumer, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
So would encourage everyone to take advantage of the Don Small Business ecosystem. There is a lot out there across all the systems commands and at the warfare centers, and dedicated people to do outreach and to partner with small businesses to help them navigate this process. In addition, we've got the Naval X activities that are kind of meet me points to bring together government, industry, and academia, whether that's for requirements or for demos or for funding, SBIRs and STTRs and things like that. And I'll say within PO Digital, with our Tech Horizons view, we really try to safely protect innovation and experimentation from the demands and the weight of an enterprise service. That often we smother good ideas because we say, well, let's palm for it with 10 decimal places of fidelity, firm fixed price, long-term contract where we're going to be in 7 years, rather than saying over 90 to 180 days, what can we demonstrate in an experimental mode, and then transition across that valley of death. So we use our Tech Horizons to say a Horizon 3 experiment that's coming out of that community with all their special authorities and funds. We're just an interested observer, and we're influencing it. In Horizon 2, we're piloting with our own money, but we're still keeping it somewhat separated with an eye to getting into Horizon 1, where a true enterprise service has a scale, something like Flank Speed or Hyperion. And then always Horizon 0, we need to cattle drive things out. Thank you for your service, recoup that funding, because everyone's heard about the budget top lines. It's really a divest to invest circumstance. So we're, from many different facets, trying to put the tools and the engagement methods in place to broadcast what our requirements are, to make sure that there are partners out there for small businesses to help them figure out how to come into the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think I would add, so absolutely, I think we're trying to do the same thing with small business outreach and research, but I think it also makes sense to think about where we're trying to go. We're trying to go to distributed data. We're trying to move to public-private partnerships. Again, top line kind of forces us down these roads. We also, for the Coast Guard, we have the Coast Guard Auxiliary, which is non-formal members. So there's lots of ways to engage with the Coast Guard Auxiliary. But really, I think we would love to understand more of a product-based delivery model, right? So as a vendor, as a small business, you necessarily don't have to be a massive, giant organization. But if you specialize in a specific product that we're looking for, and it can be not necessarily a tangible product, but an information product, we're looking for ways to consume those. We're looking for ways to sort of take the people constraint that we have and understand how we can buy on a consumptive constraint. So those sorts of things don't necessarily require a large business to do. We are also looking at better ways to contract that. We've worked with DIU, so they've got some innovation programs that specifically are built around small businesses that can deliver quickly. We're also looking at different ways to leverage things like other transactional authorities, SBIRs, STTRs. If you can deliver products that are valuable and meaningful quickly, we want to talk to you. We want to understand what you've got. We want to understand how to bring those products in and incorporate them into the ways that we work. So that, to me, is a big part of transformation. I appreciate the question. It's a really good point that I think sometimes we lose sight of is industry can change the way that they deliver their products to be more valuable to us. And we really look for industry to kind of set some of those models up.
While we're waiting for our next audience question, I actually want to go back to some of the governance pieces that Colonel Woodward brought up earlier. Super important, boring but important, I guess, is sometimes the way people say it. Generally, and feel free to answer this however you want, but as you've started moving into an area where you're more providing and facilitating the consumption of commercial services rather than so much of a focus on government services, how much have you found that your existing governance structures and policies are well suited to that kind of service delivery model? How much have you had to do by exceptions to policy? How hard has that been, and what still needs to be done on that front?
I guess I can start there. You've alluded to a lot of the challenges that we experienced early on. So the structures as they existed did not support bringing in a lot of those partners or potential partners, right? Within IC4, literally, I would say 70% of our policies had to be rewritten in order to cover down on the full scope of these modernization efforts across the portfolio. However, most of those existing forums, engagement structures are statutory. So it's really about finding trade space within milestones, within those processes to build momentum, acceleration, and speed, and to leverage more agile approaches to delivering the capabilities, right? And then there's the mindset change really of getting everyone to really shoot for iterative delivery of value as opposed to one and done, right? So that's challenged by, hey, we've always done it this way, right? And we've already moved out, right? It takes significant effort to get all of the requisite stakeholders to go back and say, hey, how do we decompose this to get value in front of the ultimate customer quickly to both assess and demonstrate that, hey, yes, this is the value we're looking for. Let's build on that, right? And quite frankly, it's a huge paradigm shift, right? It's a cultural shift that is not easy to swallow, all right? Hopefully that answers your question, sir.
No, that's great. Navy, Coast Guard, but similar things with a lot of policy redevelopment required here, or what have you found?
Yeah, I would say that certainly there's been a lot of policy modernization over the last few years to clear away some of the cruft of the earlier epic. You know, especially with crawl, we said that, with cloud, we said we're done crawling, we're really done walking, we should be sprinting at this point. And so a few years ago, there was an effort to clear the field so that we could do cloud at speed, one of the results of which was Neptune and other things. And I think, you know, in terms of governance and alignment, there are really two key concepts that we're leveraging, and they're in the industry book that I mentioned. Don CIO has published them fairly recently as Agile Centered Design Concepts, or ACDCs. And the first one was the Tech Horizons I just went through a minute ago. The other one is what we're calling world-class alignment metrics. And it's really finding a few mission outcomes and technical outcomes that resonate that we can use within governance and with industry to all align around how we measure the goodness of a thing. So rather than saying, I want just the capability, of course we want to describe the capability, but we want to say, well, how's it going to impact customer satisfaction? How's it going to impact operational resilience, adaptability and mobility, user time lost, cost per user? These 5 things, everyone can latch onto one or more of them, and they really help us to have that governance discussion, but also for industry, if you want to be successful pitching us, come and say, you know, in the area of, you know, data protection, I think that I can improve customer satisfaction, and I've got case studies to show it, or an experiment, or a demo. And so, okay, you know, we really care about customer satisfaction a lot, and we want to measure it, and we want to see improvements. We've been able to do this in the case of, for instance, our NMCI laptops. We're able to measure the decrease in user time lost as we cleaned up the image. We put a sensor on from a company we're working with, and we were actually able to go down to the machine level and see things decreasing from an average of about 12 minutes to about 2 minutes. And that's a significant amount of time lost, especially when you're sitting there watching the blue circle turn. It feels a lot longer than 12 minutes, and in some cases it was. But being able to see the granular data and say this specific asset tag that belongs, to you, sir, you know, in particular, or to whoever at whatever location, it's allowed us to be preemptive in some cases, to see emerging service delivery issues and to forestall them before they became big occurrences. And everyone was able to really rally around this user time loss decrease because it's inherently valuable and everyone sees that. So whether that's governance or industry, that really helps us have one conversation.
Yeah, and I think if I were to sort of talk about the boogeyman here, it is acquisition is not really designed for the way that we want to deliver services today. We're trying to start building a different way to do acquisition, actually following and partnering with Navy on the way that we do software acquisition to be more iterative. We've got a big contract coming up, which is going to be sort of a capacity-based contract where we're looking at trying to buy sprint teams that aren't necessarily tied to a specific program or a specific thing, but where we can move capacity around within the organization to better leverage when customer requirements are ready to go, when we have an emergent need. Some of those things are really hard when we think about from an acquisition perspective. So we're looking at it that way, but I like what you said about, how do we use governance to get to a measurable outcome? How do we then turn those measurables into mission outcomes? And then how do we close that loop, right? How do we bring that back around so that it feeds into what we're trying to deliver? And I think that really gets to where does the customer sit within the organization? How does that customer have a feedback loop for us? How do we understand what they're looking for? We took a similar journey with our desktops. I think everybody did after some of the hubbub, a couple of years ago. That led to us thinking about very differently the way that we deliver them. Bringing in things like, we've got a Manta Virtual Desktop, which is Azure Virtual Desktop. But to me, I think if we can learn to acquire things differently, if we can think about delivering capabilities iteratively, but then closing the loop and taking that feedback and turning it into something that we continue to improve upon, I think governance becomes a lot easier because now you've got the customer at the table. You don't necessarily need to speak at them. You can speak with them. They can give you direct feedback. So, governance to me, I hope we're sort of evolving out of governance as the way to direct things, and we're actually using, sort of constructive feedback and measurement mechanisms.
And before anyone walks out and says that Navy's happy with 2-minute boot times, that's where we are at the moment. With our Nautilus endpoint, not just a virtual desktop, but the physical device for Nautilus, 30 seconds or less. Windows Hello for business type log on.
Barbara, did you want to weigh in?
I would like to mention specifically to the topic of governance and a little tongue-in-cheek for that we're at a sprint right now, is that we need to make sure as well we're not running with scissors, right? The provisional ATOs that come organically with cloud strategies are not zero trust, and especially as you start migrating additional applications into the cloud, we still need to have that caution. So we have the appropriate microsegmentation, so we have the appropriate security provisions, so we're not opening ourselves up to potential detrimental access.
Come to you in just 1 minute. I wanted to follow up briefly because a lot of this takes us back to the workforce piece that we started to get back into earlier. The theme that I'm hearing over and over again here is we're trying to deliver services and tools so that the workforce can build these things iteratively rather than doing big bang acquisitions of software or IT programs. How do you do that in a way where the workforce actually does take these tools and run with them, knows that they're available first of all, and then takes them and run with them, rather than doing what Barbara talked about earlier, which is just lift and shift existing applications into a virtual machine, into a cloud?
Yeah, so we have spent a lot of time trying to do that. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. You've got to have an enterprise architecture that understands what the capability areas of the organization are. You got to be able to prioritize them. You have to be able to understand what your customers' missions are. They have to be at the table talking to you so that you understand the tools that they're missing, where the gaps in the organization are, what your capacity to deliver the service yourself is, versus what the expertise of the workforce is. There's so many aspects. That's a really difficult needle to thread. I think you can do it a lot of different ways. Really, it just comes down to having a clear understanding of what the user's needs are, having them clearly providing feedback so that you can continue to iterate and improve. But then there's also this transition of thinking of the CIO office as controlling all of IT. you got to be able to almost let go of some of that and understand that CIO's job is to deliver IT that the workforce can consume. We've got a very digitally literate young workforce coming in, and they are more digital native than some of the folks that are in the CIO's office these days. So where we can understand and get them to sort of embrace the idea that they are part of the digital workforce, I think all of those things make a huge difference.
One of the opportunities we've taken to build on this is not just specific communication strategy to publicize the availability of these tools, but the Deputy Commandant for Information, the last 3 years now, has sponsored a innovation challenge where the challenge was for the workforce writ large to look at their business processes and use the tools already available on the network to address those. And that is well received, not only by that community that gets to leverage that new capability, but to show others across the workforce, hey, these things are out there and they can help you in your day-to-day travels, if you will.
Thanks for your patience. Please go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Good morning, and thanks for your time this morning. A question about the sort of evolution of the overall architecture and how you can apply digital or cloud technologies, call it what you will, to some of the pacing problems. And so maybe the hypothetical Navy sailor embedded with a Marine unit at a Marine poster station who then deploys on a Navy ship and then goes into an expeditionary environment. How do you see cloud blending across those architectures, both for shore-based enterprises and services that are available, whether infrastructure or platform or software as a service architectures, and then being deployed on ships, and then being deployed to expeditionary or at times very tactical situations?
Yeah. From the perspective of the architecture of the information environment itself, there have been a lot of enablers that have been delivered and are in the process of being delivered. So for instance, we're using Naval Identity Services as our ICAM enterprise service to help integrate the identity management within the MXN and the Navy networks and flank speed. So we still have that, Active Directory, Entra ID tooling in place, but now we've got additional capabilities that help us to synchronize and exchange identities and attributes across those identity stores. So now we can really see each other's identities and the permissions associated with them and all the things that are enabled there. We absolutely have the goal of having, Department of the Navy, Department of Defense users able to go wherever, get on the enterprise Wi-Fi, wherever, because we're doing CERT-based authentication. Going onto ships, we don't want to have separate embarkables from the ship native workstations. We don't want to have the Muse having to build their tactical C4 environment every time they deploy. So all those things are increasingly possible. It's going to take a bit of time and effort to get there. And then I would also say it goes back to kind of the DevSecOps mindset and pathways to production. And we often think about the dev side, and then we sort of assume that ops will take care of itself, which of course is 100% backwards. And people ask, why do we have so many software factories? And the answer is, well, why do we have so many operational IT environments? So we need to have at least the number of pathways to production as we have production environments. And as those production environments harmonize, we can start to rationalize the pathways and the dev environments that feed them and the application architectures that are supported on them. Kubernetes is not the same as no code, low code. But that pathway to production conversation is just the most important one, and it doesn't get enough time and attention.
Yeah, if I could, thank you. Kind of a follow-up, you sort of addressed it, is we talked about from the user side and single sign-on. Now from a developer side, if I'm a small business with a capability that I've, say, deployed on an enterprise service through NMCI, how do I just develop once and deploy many? Or how do I stay away from that environment? Or now I have to go get a different certification or a different ATO or work through a different problem set?
Yeah. So to the degree we can actually make the production environments the same, obviously that simplifies things. To the degree we can get to the same standards and certain zero trust capabilities that help simplify things. Then we have things like virtual desktop and remote access that say, well, maybe you're coming from this environment, but you need access to that environment. We don't need to give you 2 computers. You can have the appropriate NVD image or what have you on your desktop to get into specialized environments, whether that's for data protection or for software development with different tools and security profiles. So kind of sandboxes within sandboxes from that perspective.
Thanks very much.
Good morning. So this question is focused around B2B. I know you mentioned earlier about B2B and cross collaboration and how that's bringing a lot of value to the M365 suite. So this question is more of the B2B technology has been expanded outside of kind of just an M365 collaboration technology, and it's more of expanding out to support other workloads that are not M365 native stuff, such as Nautilus or Azure Virtual Desktop Manta for us. So I think we're looking in the Coast Guard at trying to figure out kind of the trade space between a traditional ICAM platform and the B2B technology and cross-tenant sync and all that technology. Is there a kind of a trade-off that you guys are doing in the Navy to kind of figure out how much of the traditional ICAM system you should be leveraging versus how much B2B technology you should be investing in? And how are you kind of pushing the rest of the DoD to try and adopt the B2B as a kind of extension past the M365 collaboration into this kind of use it for a lot more stuff? Because I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of components that are doing B2B things that are outside of the M365 collaboration, but we're also seeing a lot not investing in that technology. So we kind of have this issue where we're investing time and effort in making this B2B more, and it seems that other components might not be able to integrate the way that we're anticipating with kind of a Microsoft proprietary technology.
Yeah, so I think from the Coast Guard perspective, you put it perfectly, right? Our look is a combination of ICAM and B2B, right? We see identity trying to traverse not just individual environments, but trying to also work with state and local partners, trying to understand how do we manage credentialing at a global perspective, not just being application specific. We are sharing identities across the board. It is difficult when you've got multiple standards you've got to support. Definitely looking for some opportunities for that to be more consolidated across the board. But I am also interested in sort of the Navy side. Like, are you seeing B2B as sort of an external proxy for ICAM, and how are you working at integrating that?
Yeah, to me, B2B is incredibly specific to Microsoft 365 as a SaaS. And when you're talking about software applications in the absence of a third-party standard, it's going to be several B2Bs that are specific to those software applications. I think ICAM can play very nicely with them. I don't think it's either or, but probably in the enormous potential SaaS ecosystem, until we get to the point of some type of convergence of like CASBs, Cloud Application Security Brokers, with the zero trust kind of multi-level security, attribute-based access control function. I'm not sure there's going to be any type of universal B2B.
And as I mentioned earlier, I think in my opening remarks, I do think it's important about where within the architecture the identification service exists, right? If it exists within a specified cloud service provider enclave, that's going to make this a lot more difficult than if it resides as a capability that crosses multi-cloud environments. So I think that's an aspect that has to be considered that will enable that sharing and that collaboration at a much larger scale.
Awesome, thank you.
We are down to our last minute. Anybody want to squeeze one more in? If not, any of our panelists have anything they want to wrap up on that you didn't get a word in on?
I would like to invite everyone to come visit us at the Information Warfare Pavilion this afternoon, 2:30 to 3:30. We'll have smiling faces and brochures.
All right. Very good. Thank you all. Please help me thank our panel, everybody.